Well, I should start by saying that migration is, on the one hand, as old as humanity itself. People have always been on the move. But of course, we know that it has escalated as a consequence of US imperialism, of capitalist plunder, of the plunder of resources, of people, of sanctions, of blockades, of imperialist interventions and wars, and now climate change and the environmental crisis, all of which have disrupted and destabilized whole regions, but also produces these extreme forms of global inequality, where the accident of birth, what side of some man made border you happen to be born on, determines so much about your access to jobs, resources, education, and healthcare. As a result, every year we have tens of millions of people on the move somewhere in this planet. It's now a permanent feature of the world that we live in, and it shows the need for common solutions. So I joined the PSL in 2006, almost 20 years ago now, right when the mass movement for immigrant rights was taking off throughout the country. At the time, I was a college student and I was involved in some campus organizing, but I'd never seen or imagined anything like what we were experiencing all across the country. In the span of a few months, these mega marches started popping off in big cities like Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, but not only in that big cities, in small cities in Northern Virginia and Ohio. There was demonstrations happening in small places in Tennessee and Washington, places that weren't necessarily known for having big immigrant populations. And this is at a time when there wasn't a lot of protests happening around the country. So it was really a momentous moment. We were protesting a new bill that was going to further criminalize immigrants and their families. It was called HR 4437. The bill actually passed in the House. This was a truly fascist bill that was going to criminalize all undocumented immigrants and their families as felons. And anybody who did anything to help them could also face those consequences. The way that it worked is that if you gave them a place to stay, or theoretically, if you transported an undocumented person, you too would face felony charges. So basically, that means that all families living with an undocumented family member were at risk under the new law. Our community responded with what were then the biggest coordinated protests in US history, a general strike or the Day Without an Immigrant boycott. I remember seeing videos in Southern California, where I'm from, of hundreds and thousands of high school students and middle school students taking over freeways and stopping traffic. And literally millions of workers stopped working in an explosion of activity from people all over the country. In Queens, New York, where I am now, it seemed like every business shut down. And then everyone joined in this massive stream of people marching miles to Manhattan City Hall. All in all, we had, a group that was always considered too fearful to protest or demand their rights, who stood up. And the newspapers actually referred to this awakening as the awakening of the sleeping giant, they called it. It was an incredible, exciting time that culminated in the first general strike in this country in a very long time. On May 1st, 2006, a day without an immigrant, as it was called, we brought the country to a standstill and really revived the spirit of Mayday, which had become almost a forgotten holiday since it was really only celebrated by small groups of leftists. But back then, these mega marches were happening every few months, and people were mobilizing in small cities and large cities alike, not too different from what's happening right now in this country. And in this case, it wasn't one organization or one leader, it was the masses of people, and it had an impact. Congress not only dropped the anti-immigrant bill that had passed the House, but they actually went into immediate discussions about passing immigration reform to create a pathway to citizenship, as they called it, for the 12 million undocumented people. But in my presentation tonight, I want to share some of the lessons we learned throughout our involvement in the struggle, as well as some of the connections and questions that we have to grapple with or address today, because what we know that the past is not really going to determine the future, but we can learn lessons on how to intervene in the present. So one lesson is that the protest movement was redirected by mostly Democratic politicians. and some Democratic-aligned organizations who took the people out of the streets and focused them on the elections. The slogan went from full rights for all immigrants to today we march, tomorrow we vote. And now we have to focus on getting the right people elected. Obama even ran on the slogan, "Si se puede," yes we can, and promised full legalization. But it never happened, despite having a majority in the House and Senate. The 2006 struggle demonstrated the power of our class, but it also proved the class character of the Democratic Party and its particular role in sidetracking and diverting struggles from becoming more radical and more militant. In all struggles, there's lots of twists and turns in between. The bill that we were fighting against was ultimately defeated by this enormous mass movement. But the demands that we were driving for, amnesty, full rights, were not realized. And so much of the organizing and the energy that came out of that movement was funneled into voting and the Democratic Party, the dead end that keeps us from advancing. That's why all these years later, there are still so many people without papers, although it's not a complicated process that they could fix, you know. The movement was taken out of the streets, the right-wing backlash then has now actually set the terms of the discussions in Washington ever since, and that's how they like it. So with that said, I have to say that this struggle produced many lifelong revolutionaries. Many of our founding members in the New York City branch joined the party or were consolidated in the party as a result of that struggle. We weren't socialists before that struggle. Many of us, we weren't really anti-socialist either, but we were drawn into the streets primarily because of the attack on our communities. And we all came in with different ideas about what was possible, what the problem was, and how we could contribute to the movement. Just a couple years before, when I was 18, I voted in my first election for a Democrat. And not the Green Party, not the VSL. I voted against Bush. I voted against Bush and for John Kerry. But I was attracted and consolidated into the party because the party helped me take action and helped me understand the issue and the world, in fact, much more deeply. Instead of wasting my time making excuses for a party who doesn't give a damn about our family, I could actually build a movement that could transform this country. For those of us who were pulled in from this struggle over the years and over the course of our participation in different party initiatives, we came to understand the importance of the party, not just different nonprofits and service organizations or mutual aid groups, but the actual party in advancing the struggle to unite our class across all of the issues and to keep it independent. So important to keep it independent of both parties, to not give away our leverage and our strength, to build some type of goodwill. Like what more goodwill do they need? We already feed them. We do everything for them. What other promises do we have to make to them? To the contrary, they are the ones who owe us. They are the ones who owe our families, who would be nothing without us. And yet they take us for granted. I say this because in our interventions and actions right now, we're going to come across the same types of people who want to do something for their communities. These are our future comrades. And the more that we connect with them and talk with them about what's going on and how we're intervening collectively to advance the struggle, the more likely that they're going to stick around and grow in ways that they never imagined. And, you know, many young people who got involved in 2006, for instance, became the frontline activists who won DACA. You know, DACA wasn't everything, but it provided some sort of relief for dreamers who had come into this country as undocumented children. Everything in our country, everything has been won through struggle, everything. And this brings me to Mayday. We're expecting big demonstrations in several cities, including Chicago, where Mayday all started. It's essential that we all know this history that has been stolen from us and erased in our education system. They want us to believe that immigrants and citizen workers can't unite. They want us to believe that the struggle is pointless, but the history of Mayday shows something completely different. I hope everyone knows the story of the 8-hour workday, how it was won through sweat and blood of the working class, the whole working class, including immigrants. The struggle for the 8-hour workday goes all the way back to the Civil War, where working 12 and 14 hours a day was a norm. Labor organizations influenced by Marxists with a more revolutionary approach to winning the 8-hour workday started to form in the 1880s. And then on May 1st, 1886, around 500,000 workers took action. 3 days later, in Haymarket Square in Chicago, 65,000 workers were on strike. And when they tried to stop the replacement workers, the police opened fire on the strikers. The next day, a mass rally was organized to denounce the police murders. A bomb was thrown at the police, to which the police reacted by wounding and killing many, many strikers. 8 worker leaders were put on trial, 4 of whom were not even present at the rally, which goes to show that they were really being tried for their organizing, for their militancy in organizing. 4 people were hanged, including 3 immigrants from Europe. In fact, if you go and look at their flyers and posters, they all had to be translated into multiple languages. A huge backlash was launched against immigrants, leftists, against labor unions and civil liberties. There was a period of intense repression and mass firings. And then when Mayday ended up being celebrated all over the world as the 8-hour day was finally won, it never got official recognition here in the United States. The labor unions wouldn't touch it because it seemed too radical. Many were also actively organizing against immigrant workers and lobbying to keep them out. It seemed like all was lost, and it wasn't until the 1930s, almost a half a century later, that the 8-hour day was finally won. And there was also this powerful labor movement emerging that said, we have to organize not just the skilled workers, but all workers, regardless of background. And that is what led to so many important victories. Still, Mayday didn't come back in the United States really until 2006. The immigrant workers brought it back, and because labor unions had woken up to the fact that you have to organize immigrants and US-born workers in common unions instead of organizing against immigrants. The labor unions came back into Mayday as well. This was a huge development for putting back on the table our own revolutionary history, for showing our common power to go on strike, and for the possibility of uniting workers of all nationalities. We know the capitalists have their own agenda with immigration. They want to get the cheapest, most pliable labor possible. They want us to associate immigration with cheap wages. But what's our plan? We have to remind people that it was low-wage immigrant workers who helped win the 8-hour workday and helped build our unions. These are people who have injected militancy and courage into our class. The 8-hour workday wasn't just for German or English or Polish immigrants. It was a win for everybody. And we should celebrate the fact that the labor unions are back in Mayday now, even if they don't use all the same slogans or messaging that we might use, because the natural tendency of this country is for each group of workers to simply organize and live among themselves. We live in a very segregated society where groups are set against each other, feeling isolated, powerless. But when the working class begins to move, when people start talking about uniting, when people start to discuss defending our immigrant brothers and sisters, whenever that happens, we see each time that Mayday starts to make a comeback. It happened in 2006. It happened in Minnesota just a few months back. We can make it happen again. Once people lose their fear, the working class ultimately is more powerful than any other force in society. Thank you.